A CBC News investigation has found it took Ottawa weeks to act on a warning about Canada's limited supply of personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE. The National Emergency Strategic Stockpile warned officials about a shortage back in early February, but it was not until mid-March that the government signed contracts to procure items like N95 masks. JP Tasker has the details from Ottawa.
Briefing note from the Public Health Agency of Canada warned of a looming shortage of personal protective equipment, or PPE, things like masks, gloves, and gowns. And with COVID-19 ripping through Asia at this time, the bureaucrats in charge of the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile said Ottawa needed to buy more and fast. But CBC News has revealed internal government documents that show the people in charge of purchasing did not act on that advice until more than a month later. While there were some smaller contracts in February, things like $55,000 for gloves and $58,000 for gowns, there would not be the multi-million-dollar contracts we'd see in the months ahead as Canada scrambled to keep up with demand for PPE. In fact, the first major contract for N95 masks didn't come until March 18th, days after the federal government coordinated a national shutdown of economic and social life in this country. I spoke to the president of the Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Sandy Buckman, and he says this delay in ordering caused undue hardship for his members, for medical professionals right across the country. He said there was a great deal of mental stress and anguish because the government did not have enough PPE on hand for doctors and nurses who were treating COVID-19 patients. A spokesperson for Health Minister Patty Hajdu said that they have learned a lot about procurement since the early days of this pandemic. They sidestepped a question as to why they did not order more PPE early, but they said they are prepared for more PPE on hand in the fall if there is a second wave of this pandemic. That message was echoed by the Chief Public Health Officer of this country today, Dr. Theresa Tam. She was asked about our story, and here's what she had to say about what will happen in the future with regard to personal protective equipment.
Personally, I think a lot of lessons have been learned, and as we plan for the reasonable worst-case scenario, the key is to, as I say, overplan, overstock, and get more of those supplies in as now that we have the summer months, as it were. But, all of those things need to be strengthened as we go forwards.
The Conservative critic for public services, Kelly McCauley, says the Liberal government clearly dropped the ball on ordering PPE in the early days of this wave of the pandemic. In a statement to CBC News, McCauley said the Liberals were slow to act on COVID-19, full stop. They had domestic and international evidence that there was a global crisis unfolding. They ignored it, they dithered, and Canadians suffered. Their failure to move on procuring PPE for Canada ultimately led to a dangerous shortage while the country struggled to fight the pandemic. The experts I spoke to said they do not want to see a repeat of these shortages, and they say if there is a directive from bureaucrats in charge of the emergency national stockpile, they hope Ottawa will follow through on those orders. John Paul Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.